Hi, and welcome back. Thank you for kicking it with Coton House again. Today, we have a very special episode. We are going to talk about the evolution of Houston. We have a few special guests that are going to help us appreciate how Houston has evolved over the years. For those who don't know, Houston is ranked the fourth largest city here in the United States, trailing after New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. There's about 250 people that relocate here per day. So there's so many changes to talk about. To catch the full episode, you can check it out on our Coton House YouTube at Coton House Realty, and you can check it out on my YouTube at Venetia Brown Realty. Today, I'm going to be a spectator with you guys so that I can learn a little bit more about Houston and appreciate the growth of it. So stay tuned while our special guests come and join us. I've been working all day. Can I catch a break? Give a pretty brown girl her space. You can keep your bitter. I'ma make a better way.
I am 9/10 native Houstonian. I grew up in the southwest part of the area, near the Addicks Reservoir Dam locations. And my dad was a rice farmer. He leased property from the government inside the reservoir area to grow his crops and run some horses. And every now and then, just to get out of the country into the big city, we'd load up in the family roadster, my brothers and I, and drive into Houston on the old Westheimer Road. And this was, I'm not going to tell you how long ago it was because I don't really want you to know how ancient I am. But in other words, we would drive into what was the city at that time, and we would pass what is now Westheimer and the 610 Loop. And on one of the corners was a pasture with cows grazing, very pastoral, beautiful setting with a two-room schoolhouse, which is now the Galleria. And it's just amazing what I have been able to witness in terms of the development of the city. 610, Loop 610 was the first loop developed for the city. And it is now accompanied by the Beltway 8 loop, as well as the 99 Parkway loop. The 610 loop was developed initially as a defense loop, where supplies and military folks were transported around the city right after World War II. And it was the first 38 miles of the loop, but it wasn't all, just as you've seen in the development of the other loops, they're not completed all at once. And so over a period of time, the 38 miles was extended. And it's memorable because during the construction of the loop, Bel Air was still in a developing area. But there were homes already constructed, and 250 of those homes had to be demolished in order to make room for the loop to be put in place. It's a dynamic city, and I love being in Houston. There's no place I would ever really want to be, and I just enjoy so much having seen how everything has transformed, and that we are the dynamic city that we are now.
It's amazing to talk about the impact that the road network system, the freeways, had on sort of the development of Houston, because Shannon and I grew up in the 80s and 90s in Houston, and so all that was here already. So we saw sort of the impacts of all of that happen. We didn't know what Houston was like prior to, and so since I've been working with Upper Kirby, we've had a chance to sort of look at a lot of that, talk to people who were here before 59 went in, and some of the what's interesting to me is that it's the freeway connectivity that has sort of shaped the way that the properties have developed and the way that sort of density nodes have happened in Houston, and it's been a big guider for that. It's also become a big barrier. So I hear that before 59 was here, West University and River Oaks were not separated by a physical barrier, and you could run across what is now 59 from one to the other. And so, we just recently renovated Levy Park, and I've got one of my board members was here before 59, and so he tells the story that it was Levy Field and Coke Field where the Coke bottling plant is now. Mm-hmm. And so the older kids would play at Coke and the younger kids would play at Levy, and they would run across and harass the younger kids after the game. Now there's this enormous freeway there that has separated those two neighborhoods, but has connected such wider areas and sort of spurred off a whole new sort of connectivity. So it's interesting.
That's really cool. I was lucky enough to hear some of the stories about it living with my great-grandmother growing up, who had lived off of Kirby Drive since the 1930s, late 1930s, and my family still lives there. And then starting a business in 1935, Doyles Pharmacy, which still stands today in Westview. My family still runs it.
Oh, that's awesome.
When they moved into that home in the late 1930s, 1940, Kirby wasn't fully paved yet. They had just moved there from the farmland that is now the Galleria. And I sure wish they had held on to that land because we'd be living a very different life now, right? If we still own the land on Post Oak. But they wanted to move into the city. So they moved all the way over to Kirby at Westheimer, which was pretty far back then. But she had some really neat stories to tell about that and how long it's come. And it's pretty cool that our pharmacy has stood the test of time and all of these changes and the Walmarts and everything that have gone up, because I think people like that little bit of history and they like that personal bit of Houston that's still around.
Yeah. It's cool. Kirby and Westheimer, looking at some of the historic photos that we've collected, and that's one of the things about Houston that we don't do a great job of is documenting sort of where we come from, because we build so readily, easily throughout the city. We don't have zoning. We don't, there's no barriers to people coming in and sort of putting up the right thing for the market at the time. And so that's how Houston has developed out and out and out and out. But as things, 250 new people a day, as things get more dense, we don't really document what was there before. And so, it's a treasure when you find those old photos of Westheimer and Kirby before it was paved. And it used to be a dairy farm. It was Dickey Dairy Farm was right there on Westheimer and Kirby. Yeah. It was Humble Gas was at Westheimer and Kirby, and it's just an interesting thing when you see a lot of these big cities that are sort of landlocked, like New York and Chicago and some of San Francisco, and they had to grow up early, and so that density was already there by the geography of it. And in Houston, we've always sort of had a build out approach to affordable housing. It's like if you can't afford it here, you move out. And at the time, Westheimer and Kirby was the suburbs, and we just have constantly sort of redefined what the suburbs is. Moving out now as far as the Grand Parkway, and it's amazing to me. It's kind of an interesting sort of social study to see how far people were willing to drive to get to these density nodes, because I thought that 45-minute commute was about the limit, but people are now driving hour and a half to get to work every day.
Sometimes 2 hours.
Sometimes 2.
In the woodlands and further out.
That's right.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Well, it's interesting. Back earlier in my development, I first came to Houston. I couldn't wait to get to Houston.
Where'd you come from?
Sugarland.
Okay.
The Sugarland. Well, graduated from high school in Sugarland. And I couldn't wait to get to Houston. And one of my first apartments was on Oakdale Street, near the medical center, right across from Riverside Terrace. And eventually, when I started my family, we bought a house in Spring Branch, right off of Katy Road and Bunker Hill. And we had friends in Houston who said, "We're never coming to see you. You live too far. You live too far away." And they didn't.
How fast were cars going back then?
Isn't that like the physical epicenter of Houston now? I was told that once. I mean, because Houston goes so far west now that Spring Branch is the physical
mall.
It's
Yeah.
named
I mean,
City
it's-
Center for that reason.
Yeah, it's
Just like you, Shannon, with your family. I wish I had held on to that
Oh my
house.
gosh, can you imagine? I mean, they didn't know, right? Who knew what it had
No.
become? I mean, but
and
wow.
that's a direct byproduct of that network, that road
Yes,
network, that
yes.
freeway network, is the fact that city center is the sort of population hub right now for Houston, and where
Yes.
everybody's
Kinda gravitating.
where everybody's kind of gravitating so far west of downtown,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because of I-10 and easy access, and it's Houston's easier to spread west than it is east, just because we have the Gulf and we have the sort of refinery natured land uses
Mm-hmm. Right.
down to the east.
Yeah.
So west was the natural way for that to go.
Yeah.
And now you've got all these great developments in West Chase, and in this,
Yeah.
everything's shifted. But downtown, we're big enough that we support both. We have this sort of downtown, we have this uptown, we have the West Chase area, we have Greens Point, we have Upper Kirby Greenway, and so we really are a city that has 5, maybe even 6 downtowns, and that's
Yeah.
a cool thing because it gives us a whole lot of diversity in not just population, but the physical context.
Yeah, and aesthetic.
And the Woodlands. I mean, it's just incredible how the Woodlands has developed. And now there's a whole segment adjacent to the Woodlands that is called City Place, where ExxonMobil has their collaborative campus of 17 buildings, and Hewlett-Packard is moving all of their corporate headquarters to City Place, and ExxonMobil is actually moving their headquarters from Dallas to City Center, and it's just a magnificent hub that's attracting hundreds and hundreds of people, and so they need places to live, and so there's all kinds of residential development as well as retail development adjacent to the Woodlands, which is also just a huge magnet for the whole city.
Yeah, it's become its own thing. It used to be an affordable place for people to live, to commute in, and now it's becoming its own employment center, its own sort of animal.
It's
So
self-sufficient.
I think it's the little things in those neighborhoods that that kind of define them and make you nostalgic about them and whatever. And one of the things that we did looking at sort of the River Oaks, Upper Kirby area, are the blue tiled
Yes.
curb marker.
I was actually,
I like that.
And those are super cool, and they bring things back to sort of a pedestrian scale, which is interesting in Houston because you don't read those driving, you read them walking.